The report from the Office of the Public Protector has found that the appropriate procurement and supply processes was never followed during the construction of the Mayibuye Primary School in Gauteng. The investigation came after a complaint by BOSA leader Mmusi Maimane in 2020. Maimane alleged that the Gauteng Department of Infrastructure Development constructed the school on an old sewer line and without conducting a wetland study. The Public Protector released a number of reports for the first quarter of this year. For more on this, let's now speak to the Public Protector, Advocate Kholeka Gcaleka, who is now joining us live. Advocate, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us. I want to start off with the report relating to the funerals that took place in the Free State of Mdi, as well as Mayibuye, that is the former MEC for Education in the Free State. So one of the findings that you make here, PP, is that though the funeral policy does not define reasonable cost, cognizance must be taken that 5.9 million rand for a funeral could have never been the intention of the policy. Please expand a bit on that.
Good morning. Good morning to you, Aldrin, and good morning to the newsroom audiences. Indeed, we found that the 5.9 million is really not in line with the reasonable costs that are stipulated in the funeral policy that need to be taken into account when either a state funeral or a provincial funeral, differently categorized, is being procured for in line with the state laws, the financial laws, the PFMA in particular. And there's several case law as well that we have looked into. I mean, reasonable cost means that what is necessary, you know, and we also need to take into account that this is public funds that this funeral is being paid with, and therefore it has to be treated with the necessary care and the fiscal prudence that is required, and therefore that a 5.9 million for a funeral, and even though it was a funeral for 2 people, is quite excessive.
Yeah. I know with the remedial action, you do make the point that the presidency would need to look into this in consultation with Treasury. But then how do you determine what reasonable costs really mean?
The policy itself outlines that it should be the coffin, the mortuary fees, the necessary meals for the state dignitaries, for the family. So even the policy outlines the necessities that are supposed to have been procured in this respect. And in respect of this matter, the officials went further to get services of different musicians, roses worth over 75,000 rands, and so forth. So even the specs themselves, which were ultimately amended after the initial RFQ, show that there's excessiveness that they embarked on in respect of this funeral, and therefore it cannot be within the confines of the policy of reasonableness.
Yep. Do you determine that we would be able to deal with that particular aspect in terms of what the limitations should be by merely setting up legislation, or should we have something like, for instance, the Remuneration Commission that has a yearly update in terms of an increase in by percentage for office bearers? Should we envisage it that way?
Well, what our remedial action basically says is that, look, since this is part of the specs available for certain categories of people for the state to actually bury them, then the presidency must, in consultation with the National Treasury, actually give an actual amount. I mean, this has been done in other factors within the state, where basically they make an assessment in the industry of what a reasonable cost is of a funeral and actually give a stipulated amount. It can obviously increase because of inflation from year to year, but we are at a point where the actual amount is needed. If you remember, even the Mandela funeral, there's a lot of excessiveness that was embarked on in procurement in that, and the public protector also issued a report in that respect. So I think this has actually shown that there's no deterrence if there's no actual amount that is being stipulated in this regard.
Yeah. And finally, I know that you didn't look at this particular question, but do you think that there is a need for transparency around how official funerals or state funerals are conferred on an individual?
Of course, there is, because if you look into this particular matter, you find that the Free State government went on to confer a state funeral out of their own accord without following any law or policy onto the police official who was the protector to the MEC. And yes, it was out of humanitarian reasons, as they stipulate. And we are quite cognizant to that and actually quite empathetic. However, there's laws that need to be followed. And if you are offering a donation, there are prescripts, that actually govern that aspect of donations, which actually limits it to 100,000 rands. And further, that if you go more than that, there has to be a report taken to the legislature, and it needs to be approved from that level. And in this instance, it was not done. And the cost went much more than what a donation would require. So definitely I agree with you that there needs to be transparency in that regard.
Yeah. There is also the remedial action in terms of disciplinary processes against some of the officials in the Free State government. But you also make a reference to the copy being provided to the Priority Crime Investigations Unit. And this is, of course, the Hawks that we're speaking about. Have you come across any evidence that would suggest that there was any criminality involved in how the service providers were procured?
Firstly, these are state funds that we are referring to, and there's a reasonable suspicion, that this is not just an excessiveness. I mean, we've seen the patterns in other procurement matters within the state where exorbitant amounts are being paid to the service provider. And in this respect, we feel that the Hawks must have a look at it, because 5.9 million for a funeral really cannot be a reasonable cost. And it is in that respect, really, that we are making the referral to the Hawks to actually look more into the finances in this respect.
And then let's move to Tembisa Hospital, the appointment of the then CEO, Mthunzi, who was appointed as the CEO of the Tembisa Hospital, and the findings that you make there around the irregularity in terms of how he was appointed. Should the panel that have interviewed him, should they have known that there was actually another disciplinary case that was pending from Kopanong Hospital? Should they have known?
Indeed, they ought to have known. I mean, he was an internal candidate. Human resources should have had that information. His supervisor was one of the panel members at the time, and there's no way that somebody can be disciplined or even investigated without the knowledge of the supervisors. And human resources prior to shortlisting or providing a long list from the recruitment process, they should be doing some background checks. So this is the pre-interview screening process that is supposed to take place, and they ought to have advised the panel accordingly.
Yeah. And how do we tighten that particular aspect as well, then, to ensure that when you do have a panel that is appointed to conduct an interview, that you ensure that they make use of all possible tools available to them, even internally, to try and to determine whether this particular person does meet the minimum criteria to even being considered as a possible candidate?
Firstly, it's a competency issue. We need to ensure that human resources has the necessary competencies. For instance, it is clear that the Department of Health has got a company which they outsource that does the pre-screening work for them. In the absence of that, I mean, in this respect, confirming a nationality, the department could have approached the Department of Home Affairs in this respect. Its own human resource documents are within their possession. They should have done that. As much as we agree that it's a competency issue, there needs to be upskilling and so forth. But in this respect, we also believe that it was either intentional or negligently. Well, we don't have evidence to really prove that it was intentional, but it's a borderline between the two in respect of negligence. So it's really for officials to take due care, but also the senior ones who make the recommendations when being provided with the submission. Due diligence needs to take place to ensure that all aspects have been covered in this respect. And I mean, in this matter, the Z83 was incorrectly completed and nobody picked it up until they made the recommendation to the MEC.
Why was citizenship raised as an issue?
Because in the Z83, the candidate indicated that he was non-South African, which upon scrutiny by the public protector indicated that it was a mistake. So even though it was a mistake, but the Z83 was before the human resources, and they should have picked it up, and the panel should have cleared that with him in the interview.
Okay, and finally, the report that we spoke about right at the introduction around what happened in Gauteng with the construction of Mayibuye Primary School. Your findings there, why couldn't they pick up that this is actually wetland?
Well, the technical assessment was not done prior to them issuing the tender and prior to them actually starting to build on the land, which is really contrary to the legal prescripts.
Okay, and now what should happen going forward? Because here 82 million rand was spent on constructing the school.
Actually, more than 82 million rand was spent. A further almost 56% more than the actual amount of the tender has further been spent in constructing the school and actually reconstructing it after it had stayed unoccupied for a while. In this instance, because the building is already there. The learners are already occupying part of the building. What we have put in our remedial action is that they need to ensure that they reconstruct in line with some of the reports which were issued, that there's certain constructions that need to take place to ensure that the water doesn't come into the school area and it's kept outside of the school facilities to ensure a habitable environment. And further that they need to complete the remaining phase as soon as possible to ensure that the school is fully occupied, but also they need to obtain the necessary license from the Department of Water and Sanitation, which they have not obtained and which they should have obtained before occupancy.
Advocate Kholeka, thank you so much for your time. Quick one, the 7th administration being sworn in today as the office that actually deals with the conduct of members of cabinet. What would you like to say to them today?
Basically is that what every state functionary, including those who are being sworn in, is really to uphold the constitution of this country. We are in an unprecedented era in South Africa, but it's what other countries in the world are actually under, which is either it's a coalition or a government of national unity, but the principle and values of our constitution needs to be upheld to the betterment of the lives of our people. So it is the people of South Africa that need to come first in whichever arrangement there is, and as they take up offices, to really observe the laws and the governance prescripts of this country.
Thank you so much for your time. That is the Public Protector of the country, Advocate Kholeka Gcaleka. We're going to